Hello and welcome to The Artful Chef. So we are starting a new series in drawing where we are going to be focused on the human form. So today's lesson we're going to learn about how to draw the hand in a realistic way. We're going to break it down by all the different parts, and then each week we're going to add something different. So one week we may be focusing on the eye or the nose or the facial structure or the composition of the body overall and how to draw. So I hope you stick with me through those lessons. Make sure you click that bell for notifications so that you know when the next one's coming out. So let's start today we're going to take a photograph that I have made black and white of a hand. Now you could draw your own hand if you want to, but working from a reference page is a lot easier, especially when you're talking about holding your hand in a certain position for a long time. So we're going to take our reference picture and we're going to go from a basic drawing like this. This is very simple, something that you would do if you were just starting out, and we're going to turn it into something like this. So let's get started. So we're going to begin by taking a look at our hands up close. So what I want you to do is flip your hand over and notice that the basic shape of the palm is kind of like a square. Maybe a little bit rectangular, but basically you're going to draw a square. I also want you to notice that right here on your thumb, it kind of makes a triangle. So as long as we think in terms of basic shapes, it's a lot easier to draw realistically than you would think if you can break things down in a shape. I'm going to begin by drawing with a marker so that you can see my lines, but then I'm going to transfer over to pencil in just a minute. The other thing I want you to notice are your fingers. So each finger has 3 joints. If you'll notice, there's 1, 2, 3. You have 3 joints on each of your fingers. On your thumb, you do still have a joint, but you only see the second and third joints. This first joint is actually inside the palm, so you don't really notice it. So when you're drawing your hand, you're not going to draw those 3 separate joints for your thumb. You're only just going to draw those 2 that are visible outside the palm. The other thing that I want you to think about is if you look on your hand on the top side and you stretch your fingers out, you notice these lines that are coming down. So these are your tendons. They come down all to one point in your wrist, and that is your carpal tunnel. That's also going to help you keep your lines in order when you're drawing a hand. So we're going to sketch out really quickly just a basic hand. I'm going to start by doing your square. And remember, of course, you are going to want to use pencil, not marker. You're going to have your basic for your palm. Then you're going to make this triangle that comes out that represents where your thumb comes out from your palm. Then we're going to do what I like to call a mitten hand. So this is going to make it a lot easier when you start drawing in. So very lightly you would do this dashed line to represent that mitten hand. But what I want you to think about is if you look at your hand, the length of your longest finger is going to be about the same distance as it is from where your finger meets your palm to your wrist. So if you keep those in mind when you're drawing, that's going to help keep your hand proportionate. So if this is the size of my square or rectangle, I'm going to just come up here and make a mark. That's where my longest finger is going to be. And so just for the sake that you can see what I'm talking about here, I'm going to make my little mitten hand. So that's where my longest finger is. I'm going to divide this in half. And then I'm going to divide those halves each in half. So now I have my pointer, my middle finger, my ring finger, and my pinky. Out here, I'm going to draw where my thumb would be. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to just curve off. Now your longest finger, you're going to round off the end here. This finger, of course, is going to be a little shorter. And your pinky finger is going to be a little shorter. So if you go in and you fill in those lines that you started out with dashed, that is a great beginning point for you for drawing a hand proportionately. Now we're going to talk about how would we draw this in a 3D form. How do we show all of these joints and all of the lines and the different textures that you find within your skin. So if I want to make this look 3D and I want this to look realistic, think of a box of cards and the way that a box of cards looks, and begin with your square kind of angled here and make it 3D, make it three-dimensional. So here's my lines as if I was drawing a box of cards, okay? So that would be my palm from a side view. Then I'm gonna add that triangle for the side. Now I'm not going to add the three-dimensional look of the triangle just yet. I'm just gonna add that line right there. And then what we're gonna do is we're going to go in and add the lines. So let's say I want to, I'm gonna pose my hand like this, and I actually have a photograph that I'm going to use as a reference. So this is a picture of my son's hand that I took in color, and I went in the computer and I just made it black and white so I could see the details very crisp and clean, a lot more so on a black and white photograph than I could on a color photograph. So I'm gonna try to attempt to hold my hand in the same position that he had his, so that you can see all the different fingers, okay? You can see the different joints, but it's not just a basic plain straight hand, because if you held all your hand like this, you would just have the one finger that you see here and one here. You wouldn't really get that three-dimensional look. So I'm gonna hold my hand similar to his, and what I'm gonna think about here is each of these joints. So I'm just gonna make a line where that comes out. 1, 2, 3. Then this finger comes up a little bit. 1, 2 comes behind, and then the third one comes down. Now this next one I don't really see that much. We're gonna have it come down as well, and the same for this. Now what you're gonna do is you're gonna go in and you're going to make those joints. So I'm just gonna round that off and make these little cylinders here that represent each of the fingers. So that's where the joint comes in. Then I have this one that comes down, and then this one that comes down as well. So there's one joint and the third joint, and the same thing for the pinky finger. So there are my fingers. I'm going to go in and I'm going to add my thumb. I'm going to come out with this second joint, and then the end of the thumb. So that is a basic beginner on how to make your hand three-dimensional. Now let's talk about the do's and don'ts of how to add details. So very often when I ask a student to draw a finger from the side view, if you're looking at your finger like this, they're going to draw their finger round on the end, which is fine, but most of the time you will see a fingernail that looks like that. Okay, that is not a fingernail, that's a spaceship. Think about it. I got my little spaceman here, he's got his steering wheel. We're going to put some flames back here for the rocket and some wings on it. Okay, that's a spaceship, that is not a finger. So the way that I want you to think about your fingernails is simple lines again. So we had simple lines, squares and triangles, simple little shapes for our other parts. The fingernail is just as simple. When you look at the fingernail at the top of your finger, it doesn't come all the way down to the base of your finger. So if you begin with that same shape that's curved on the end, and you look, I've got my cuticle comes down here like this, my nail comes out, and my nail actually comes a little bit past the end of my finger. So I'm just going to bring that out a little bit past. So if you have manicured nails, yours would come out further. If you are a boy and you have very short nails, then of course yours, your end of your finger would come out past where your nail is. So that being said, if you have longer fingernails, you might think about this. If your nail comes out like this, we're going to do 1, 2, 3. So here's my squared off nail, and there's the end of my finger. Obviously, doing this in pencil is going to be way better. Let's talk about what it would look like if you're drawing your thumb. So if I have my thumb at an angle right here, I notice that I have this line, this line, this line. Now, I don't know if you can see this in the video, but I don't see all of the skin that comes down to the side here. So if I was going to make this curve here to represent my thumb, okay, I would have my line that's here, which is my cuticle, my line that comes down and around. So you're still going to see some of the skin over here on the side of your finger. So you want to represent that when you're drawing. Now, what would it look like if your finger was pointed at you? If your finger is coming straight at you, it might look something like an oval. You would have your cuticle still, and you would have your sides of your nail and the end. And depending on if it is a manicured nail that sticks out past the end of the skin of the finger, then you would adjust that accordingly. Now let's talk about details. Okay, skin folds, wrinkles, however you want to refer to them, are important in making a picture look realistic, but you don't want to go overboard. So I've got this reference picture here that I've transferred into a pencil sketch, and what I want you to notice is the different folds and skin markings on the fingers, and I want you to limit yourself to no more than 5 skin folds in one area. On top of limiting yourself to the number of skin folds or wrinkles that you choose to point out in your drawing, I also want you to think about only do things that are real details. Don't make up stuff that you don't see. Only put what you see there. So what I'm going to do is on this outline right here, I'm just going to mark the ones that I want to point out to you, and I'm going to actually draw them later when I make my actual pencil drawing. So right here in the curve of the hand, in this webbing area, we see a line that comes across here. I also have another one that kind of forks off like that. So that's 1, 2, 3, and let's see, here's 1, 4, 5. Same thing here on the knuckle. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if you don't have 5, that's okay. 5 is the max, but you want to have at least 2 or 3. And just so that y'all can see here, I want to outline this fingernail in this photograph just so you can see that shape. Now, one detail on the fingernail that I might go in and add is this part of the cuticle where it changes color, because that's something that I'm going to want to make a different value when I start using my pencil. So I also have some details down here at the wrist. 1, 2, 3, 4. I have some right here on the side of the hand. And I have here 3, 1, 2. And I think that's pretty good, because some of these joints we don't see. So you don't want to make lines that are imaginary. Now you do see right here where this bends. That's very noticeable, so I'm going to add that. And right here on this knuckle, it's visible. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sketch out my pencil sketch on my paper. If you are not familiar with using different types of pencils, you can check out my last video about actual drawing pencils. I've got several different kinds here that I'm going to use, and on my other video it talks about all the different kinds of hardnesses of pencils and what to use and what's best, and that'll kind of help you if you are really interested in learning how to draw properly. All right, let's get started. Okay, now that I have my hand all sketched out here, I've got my fingernails and my skin folds in the different places, making sure not to go over 5 in any area. Now I want to talk to you about shadows and values. So in a previous video, we talked about the value scale and how to create different values using a pencil. And I'm just going to use a regular pencil because that's what most people have at home. And what I want to talk to you about is the way that you hold the pencil to create different values. In my other video, I go in depth on how to do this, but this is going to be very quick. So I want you to think about your picture having at least 5 different values. I know if you look at the shadows, you can find some different values in here. So for instance, your lightest value is going to be where your skin is the lightest, okay? So it ranges from a 1 to a 10. So this area right here would be a 1. Okay, this area right in here inside the palm where it has the darkest shadow, that's going to be a 10. So already I have 2 different values. I have a value that's just a hair darker that if you notice here, you see that's right on the edge. So that would be a 3rd value. I have one that's just a little bit darker than that you see here and you see here. So that's a 4th value. And then right over here before it gets to that darkest point, you see that 5th value. So you can find at least 5 different values within your picture based on your shadows. So real quick, I want to show you where you hold your pencil is very important. And I just have a regular pencil because that's what most people have at home. If I was actually doing my paper, I would be using my drawing pencils. But I want to show you when you are creating value. So I'm just going to draw a simple rectangle here. I'm not going to worry about it being all perfect, but I want to break it down so that you can see. So your lightest value, if you hold your pencil all the way to the end and you shade, that's going to apply the least amount of pressure on your pencil lead, giving you the ability to create a very, very light value. So if I go down through here and I shade this entire rectangle with this lightest value, then I go over each section again, but I move my fingers down on my pencil a little bit each time. When you get to your darkest value, your fingers should be towards the end of your pencil. That way you can apply the most amount of pressure. So if I was going to move down to this next section, I would do this all the way down, and I'm going to keep doing that so that you can see what it looks like with the 5 different values. Now I have these 5 different visible values from my lightest to my darkest. Of course, if you were doing the Dim & Ross scale, you would know that there are 10 values, but for the purpose of this picture, we are only working with 5. So what I want you to do now is once you have drawn out your hand, done out your sketch, and I have gone in and erased all those extra lines that I drew in the beginning so that I could clean it up a little bit. You do want to make sure that if you're using one of those pink erasers, just the standard ones that you get everywhere, super easy, those erasers do leave a lot of crumbs on your paper, so make sure that if you're wiping away the crumbs, you're not wiping them away on anything that you have shaded because it will smear your lead on your paper. I was using just this plain white eraser. I do prefer the kneaded erasers. I just don't have one on hand today. But this is good in a pinch. So what I want you to do first is think about drawing in your shadow lines. So shadows are not straight, so your lines should not be straight. You want to think about the difference in a shadow and an instantaneous change in color. So an instantaneous change in value would be caused by where there is a gap between 2 objects. So anywhere where fingers meet, those are going to be instantaneous color changes. Those are going to be those very dark lines where you can see that visible difference. And so I have outlined my fingers and where they touch one another here with a darker line so that you can see that instantaneous change, so that we know that that is where a finger touches. Now, on an actual shadow that's caused by a light change, that's going to be different. Those are going to be shaded in a lot softer, and they're going to blend with another color rather than have that sharp instantaneous change. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to add the lines where I see the difference in color that's caused by lighting, not where there's changes based on the fact that there's a gap there. So I do see here on my pencil, on my paper, I have a visible difference that is here on the bottom part of this finger. I also have one that comes across here on the top of the hand. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw those in as lines here. So I'm going to put, this one kind of comes from the end of the fingernail down to that second joint, and then it starts to curve down. Then I have this one that comes up here. And I'm just going to go in and start filling in all the rest of these shadow lines that I see, and then we'll talk about how to color them in with our different values. Now that I've gone in and made marks on where all of my visible differences are on my photograph versus my sketch, I'm going to start going in and shading in those different values. And keep in mind, like I said, you should see at least 5 different values. You're going to have your lightest to your darkest. I'm going to start with my darkest ones first and get those in there so I can kind of see that difference in where I want those colors to be. And then I'll be back after I have filled in all of my values. Now that I have my shadows and my different values visible here, where I did my blending with my finger, I kind of lightened up some of my skin folds and definition that I wanted to see. So I'm just going to come back in with just a hard lead pencil, and I'm just going to redefine those a tiny bit so I can still see them. Give that definition. And at this point, if you wanted to come in and add like any of the hair that you see on the arm or any of those details like that, you could do those. They're not really necessary. At this point, I'm pretty happy with the way this looks. I would probably go in and maybe shade in the background to give it a little more color so that the picture pops out. But I'm pretty happy with it. So this is how you go from looking at a hand. Either holding your hand like this forever is a challenge. It's a lot easier if you take a photograph of your hand or if you use a photo reference. So after I finished all the details on my hand, I did go in and I shaded the background and I added some mark making techniques, the cross hatching to the background, because I wanted to kind of make that hand pop off the page and be more noticeable. So you can really do anything that you want in the background if you wanted to add some color or whatever. I just chose to stick with the pencil. But I hope that you try this and you enjoy all the different techniques, and come back next week and we'll have something different.